Everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this meeting, and a special thanks goes to, of course, to our colleagues from the Wheel, our partner organization, for joining us today. As many of you know, last summer, some of us had the privilege of traveling to Dublin for an exchange visit, and where we had the opportunity to listen to the governance structure of the Wheel in a quite insightful session, actually. And then, since that was such a valuable experience, we felt that this presentation might be brought to a larger audience, to our colleagues from our projects, other colleagues in our SDGM team, and as well as some other grant beneficiaries in our Birlikte program. As everybody knows, since governance and decision-making structure is among the essential topics in terms of capacity development, which is the focus of the Birlikte program, today's session is thus a quite excellent opportunity for us all to learn our partners' experience and reflect on how their practices, how their implementations can inspire and inform our approaches, our own approaches in our organizations. So thanks you once again, and here let me hand it over to, I think Katian, isn't it, Katian? You'll start. So thank you again, and let's get started.
Thank you so much, TJ. And hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you all. I have probably met most of you, but in case I haven't, my name is Kathy-Ann, and I work very closely with SDGM on the Birlikte project. And I work with my colleague John here, who is our governance and compliance manager. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what the next 2 hours will be, and then just share a small amount about the Wheel, in case you don't know. So 1 second. And everybody should be seeing my screen now. So as Tuche was saying, the purpose of this meeting kind of came from when we had some of the Birlikte participants and SDGM colleagues join us in Dublin in June of last year, where we chatted a bit about governance in the Wheel and also a little bit about HR management in the Wheel. And so what the next 2 hours-ish are going to look like, I'm going to very quickly introduce the Wheel and tell you a little bit about what we do, in case you don't know. Then I'm going to hand over to my colleague John, who is going to tell you about how we do governance in the Wheel. And John does it very excellently, so I think you'll learn a lot from that. We will then have a very short kind of comfort break. You can grab a tea. And then I will do a short bit on HR management in the Wheel, so just how our organization is structured and how we do human resource management as well. And then we'll finish with a Q&A. So we'll have a question and answer session, but just to say, if you have questions throughout, you can pop it in the chat, or if you have a burning question, you can raise your hand. Please do ask us questions as and when, and then we will leave time at the end as well for questions. And I will say, I know I speak very fast, so please, somebody feel free to interrupt me and tell me to slow down if needs be. So just a small bit about the Wheel. The Wheel is Ireland's National Association of Community and Voluntary Organisations, Charities and Social Enterprises. We were established in 1999, so we're celebrating our 26th birthday this year. We are an authoritative and trusted voice for the nonprofit sector, and we're committed to transparency, accountability, and the highest standards of practice and governance. Together, we work to ensure that the sector in Ireland is recognised and respected, adequately resourced, and appropriately regulated. In terms of our work, we have a simple but ambitious mission, which is to strengthen the capacity and the capability of the sector in Ireland to play their part in changing Ireland for the better. We champion the sector through our core work programs. So we have kind of 4 core areas, and they are the public policy and advocacy program, a networking program, a training and development program where we do a lot of trainings and events for our members. And then we have an information services program whereby we provide information support to our members as well. Just a kind of snippet of some of the things that we did in last year. We are a membership organization. So at the last count of this, we had 2,323 members. We have a 90% membership retention rate. And we also offer free membership to very small organizations. And of those, we have 863 organizations who are members of the Wheel that receive free membership. As you can see on the right-hand side, we host an awful lot of events, both in person and online. So we had 139 events with over 7,000 attendees at those events. And 70% of the events that we do are free for our members. So we try to provide good value for our members in allowing them to access some of our free trainings and events. One of the big, massive events that we do each year is called our Summit. And that is an event whereby we invite our members to come together and we share our learnings and experiences and chat about what the sector needs in order for the sector to be able to thrive in Ireland. And I thought it might be nice to just show you a quick video, just highlights of our summit from last year, so you can see what it looks like. And I know that in STGM you do something similar with your big festival each year, so this is kind of our version of it. So hopefully this video is going to work. And just let me know if you can't hear it.
It's not playing, I believe.
Yes, you are right.
And no voice. No audio.
Can we hear that?
Yes, now it's okay.
1,400 members of the Wheel, and we had 500 people who came to Croke Park today. And it's the annual opportunity for all of our members to get together, talk about the issues as they see them, learn a lot from each other about funding and about regulation and about all of the different challenges that we currently face in Ireland and the role that the charities are playing in helping people to live inclusive, dignified lives.
We've been coming here over the years, and it's great meeting the other voluntary groups. Sometimes you do feel like that you're working on your own. And then, of course, somebody's got a great idea or found out something that you don't know about. So you come along and go, hey, I didn't know that. And people are always willing to be very helpful to other organizations.
I think it's very important to get out and meet because everyone brings a different, fresh perspective to the table. So it's interesting to be here amongst your peers. What I love about the Wheel is that not only is it charities, but it's also social enterprises, which bring a completely different perspective to it. So the membership is very interesting and varied in itself.
We had some fantastic speakers today. We heard from Minister Joe O'Brien, who came along, and he talked about recent developments in particular of interest to members is the Charities Act, a new version of the Act, because the stronger the charities regulatory regime is, the higher public trust and confidence will be in charities. And it was also an opportunity to tell the Minister only about 15% of charities that get grant funding from the government get it on a multi-annual basis. Most charities only get it for 1 year or less. So we're saying, afford that kind of funding for 3 years or more, and charities could do an awful lot more in relation to planning around these big future challenges that we know society looks to the community and voluntary sector to solve. And we heard Derek Walker, who's the Commissioner for the Future in Wales. So members were really interested to hear about work that the Welsh are doing, projecting forward what the evidence says the future will likely look like, so that the community and voluntary sector can work out the kind of work that we're going to likely be doing in relation into the future.
So for me, one of my favourite speakers is always Nolene Blackwell, who's the former CEO of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. She's just such an inspiring person to listen to, no matter what she's saying. And she had some really good things to say about the sector and how we need to stand up for ourselves and champion ourselves and our right to advocate for ourselves.
So that is a little summary of what our summit looks like each year, and we hold it every summer. So I just thought that would be nice because you have never been to our summit. So hopefully that gives you just an idea of what happens every year. So we use it as a big, massive networking opportunity for our members. And that is enough of me telling you about the wheel. Obviously, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. But I am now going to hand over to John, who is our governance and compliance manager in the wheel. And John has a great presentation for us all on how he and we do governance in the wheel. So over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy-Ann. Let me just share my screen now quickly. Now, is that visible okay for everyone?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Super, great. Thanks, Kathy-Ann, and thank you everyone for inviting me here today. It's great to be giving this presentation again. So my name is John McBride. I am the governance and compliance manager with the Wheel. And what I want to do today is just take us through some of the structures and reporting tools we have in place in the Wheel to help us kind of fulfill our duties. I want to repeat what Kathy-Ann said in that I have a tendency to talk very, very quickly. So if I am going too fast, by all means, feel free to just tell me to slow down, put it in the chat or interrupt. I won't take offense. That is fine. So take a look at what's coming up for us over the next kind of half hour, 40 minutes. We're going to look at the legal responsibilities of a charity trustee in Ireland. We're going to take a look at our kind of governance framework and structure in the Wheel, how we manage risk, how we report on our progress, a quick slide then on just how we develop policies, organization policies, and then the Charities Regulator Governance Code, which is a set of standards that we follow. So starting off with the legal duties of charity trustees, there are essentially, it can be boiled down to 6 separate duties that all feed into each other. They're all basically part of a cycle that work together to make a charity better, to function better. I'll look at each of them now and kind of just what they mean. So the first really is ensuring that the charity is carrying out its purpose. Basically that you are doing the thing you say you're going to do. So that's making sure that you are only fulfilling a charitable purpose, that there's no private benefit, that purpose is for the benefit of the public or in Ireland or elsewhere, and that you're making a positive impact on the world. The next then is complying with the governing documents. So we call that our constitution. Some people might call it terms of association. What it basically is your contract with yourself, that you have a set of rules that you've said you're going to follow. As an organization, you have a set of rules that you have to follow as a charity or a company anyway, but you can input extra rules to follow for yourself as well. And it's very important that you do that because it is a legal document. Next then is flowing from that is being accountable and complying with the law. So as I mentioned, as a company, as a charity, there's certain requirements that you need to follow. Then we have managing the charity's resources responsibly, and this is really about working effectively. So it's planning a budget, looking at your finances, looking at the risks, making plans for the future, that sort of thing. And those are really the things we're kind of going to look at over the next kind of 30 minutes. Then acting in the best interests of your charity. So that's really embodying the values that you say you have, developing policies and sticking to them, and really just having an effective board. And then finally, we have acting with reasonable skill and care. So again, that's kind of knowing what you're doing. So being aware of your duties and complying with them, bringing the experience that you have to the boards, to the organization, and kind of keeping informed of everything that you need to do and make sure that you need to do it. So take a look now a bit more specifically at our own board and our own kind of governance framework. So at the top of everything is our board. The board is made up of volunteers. They can't accept payment for their role. They have to act in a voluntary capacity, and the board is ultimately the ones who have legal responsibility for a charity. Everything boils down to them. They have to make sure that everything is being ran well, being ran responsibly, and being ran ethically. Reporting then into the board, we have 4 subcommittees. I'll talk about them a bit later. What they are is essentially kind of advisory groups that look at topics in more detail and then report onward to the board to give them informed opinions, recommendations, so that the board can they can act confidently in the knowledge that things have been examined thoroughly. And then reporting into those subcommittees, reporting into the board is our staff. So ultimately, the CEO is the main kind of point of contact for the board, with other members then of senior directors, senior managers kind of reporting into the CEO. In the wheel, we're quite collaborative. So, I mean, I deal with the board a lot. Other members of staff would deal with the board. It's not quite a funnel like this would appear, but for most organizations, the general rule would be that things kind of flow through the CEO up to the board. So now looking more specifically at our board, we have up to 12 members on our board, with a minimum of 3. Minimum of 3 would being the legal requirement for a charity in Ireland. 8 of those are elected from amongst the membership every year. So Cathy Ann showed kind of our membership there. We've got nearly 2,500 charity members across the country. And then another 4 of those are appointed by the board or co-opted. So they don't need to go through election processes. What they basically are is, if a gap is identified in the skills on the board. So say the board realizes it doesn't have legal expertise or enough legal knowledge on the board, they can kind of go out and try to find someone or recruit someone that has that knowledge and appoint them to the board. It's a really useful tool just to making sure that there is a wide variety of skills on the board, because going through an election, you get the people on your board that your members want, but they may not necessarily have the full skills. So those appointed members really help make it a much more diverse range. People sit on the board for a term of 4 years, and then this can be renewed up to a maximum of 3 terms. So the maximum anyone would really be on the board would be 12 years, which would be quite a lot. And as I mentioned there with the elections, so every year, 2 members would reach the end of the term and go up for re-election with membership, or stand down and allow someone new to join. It can happen that an elected member isn't re-elected if they're unsuccessful in the election. Hasn't happened in my time, thank God. But that's the nature of elections. The incumbent person may not necessarily get re-elected. And then from those appointed members that I mentioned, one of them will also stand down, either for reappointment or a new person to take their place. Then in terms of how the board functions, they meet about 5 or 6 times a year. It's a 2-hour meeting, one roughly every 2 months. And then at the end of the year, they'll have a much longer 2-day session where they'll meet usually somewhere off-site in a hotel or something, and just have 2 full days of strategic sessions, looking at how the organization has performed over the the previous year and making plans for the coming years, talking about where we want to be strategically as an organization. The meetings themselves, the regular meetings, they comprise a fairly standard routine at this point. There'd be a report from the CEO which would describe operations over the previous couple of months and bringing certain matters to the board's attention. There'd be a matter for strategic focus. These are really important because the board has a part of the reason for the board to exist is to think strategically like this. So they think about where the organization is going at every board meeting and how we're performing. And then we get more into the operational side of things kind of in the second half of the meeting. So we'd have reports from subcommittees, which I mentioned, and we'll get into again shortly. We'd look at the finances, we'd look at risk, which I'll look at later, and we'd look at kind of performance indicators again, which we'll look at a wee bit later too. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the board have ultimate responsibility for an organization. They're in charge. So even as volunteers, they're in charge. The CEO does report into them. So there's a number of matters that the board have the ultimate say on. Operationally, day-to-day running, that's left to the team, to the CEO and to senior management to make decisions. But the big picture stuff, the board have to have final say on. So that's matters like approving the budgets every year, approving the end of year accounts, appointing those co-opted board members I mentioned, recruiting a CEO or senior managers, reviewing that risk, approving policies, things like that. All things that we're going to look at in a wee bit more detail as we come along. So now those subcommittees that I mentioned. We have 4 at the moment and developing another one. So they're really, really useful spaces because they're focused on a specific theme or topic. They allow the board the time to really look at specific areas in much more detail than a regular board meeting would allow. So say a subcommittee meeting is 2 hours and a board meeting is also 2 hours. That subcommittee meeting could focus exclusively on risk for 2 hours, but a board meeting could never do that because they have so many other things to do. So they're really, really valuable spaces to really look in depth at topics that matter to the organization. They are made up of a combination of both board members and some external non-board members that we've recruited because of their expertise. So taking the finance, audit and risk subcommittee here on the left as an example, their responsibilities is that they look at the monthly financial accounts, they look at our risk management processes, they look at our annual audits, things like that. So on that is members of our board and say a few external people who are qualified accountants, qualified risk experts. So they're really focused on being able to look at those kind of topics in detail and give their expertise to the board. They are, however, advisory in nature. So for the most part, they're only there to advise, to make recommendations to the board, to staff. Ultimately, for the most part, approval for matters still lies with the board. Now, looking at each of the subcommittees, just to give you an idea or a bit of a flavor of what each of them do, I've mentioned the finance, audit and risk one already. We have our governance and nominations subcommittee. So they're kind of closely aligned with basically the topic of today. So they look at board recruitment and governance. So they'd be responsible for reviewing the board's performance. They're responsible for ensuring that we're compliant with the governance code, which is the set of standards that we need to follow as set by the regulator. And we'll look at that in more detail later on. They're responsible for developing and approving kind of policies for the organizations as well. And then we have the public policy subcommittee who are much more outward focused. So as an advocacy organization, they're focused really exclusively on our advocacies, on our campaigns. They kind of really get involved with the development of positions that we want to take on important matters, development of campaigns for the public that could promote, say, promote charities and the work that they do, and really on the strategic development of the organization in this area. And then on the flip side, we have our staff and employment who are very inward focused. So they're really focused on the person, the people that are involved with the organization. So the staff, the volunteers, which include the board. So well-being, equity, diversity, and inclusion, development of kind of staff benefits, developing HR policies, those sorts of matters. I think Kathy, did I see a question come into the chat there?
No, I think that's just a participant form.
Okay.
Yeah.
Grand. It turns out I can't see the chat, so if you're putting a question in the chat, Kathy-Ann, feel free to interrupt me. Again, if I'm going too fast, which I feel I might be, please tell me to just slow down and shut up. Next, now we're going to take a look at risk management that we do in the wheel. And this is really, really key, important, a key factor to running a charity. It's a really important part of good governance. Risk is part of everything we do as a charity, and I know the people here involved or attending today would be very aware of this. You can't eliminate risk. It is always going to exist. All you can do is try and put controls in place that will just reduce the impact of the risk, or try to kind of just make it as non-impactful as possible. So I'm going to talk now a wee bit about our risk register and what we did. It's hard to squeeze into a couple of minutes, so apologies if people are finding it hard to understand. I know when we talked about this in June, some of the guys that were there said there was a similar practice for a lot of organizations in Turkey already, so hopefully that helps. But I'm happy to take more questions kind of later on it. What we did, how we started was we thought about what our categories, our risk are, and we came up with 9. So they're aligned along financial management, operational risks, legal risks, reputational, so on and so on. And for each of those categories, we decided what our appetite was so basically how much we can kind of tolerate dealing with those risks. So for example, legal risks, you're going to have a very, very low appetite for that, because if they came to pass, they'd have a really big impact on organization. Whereas a operational risk, you might have a bit more of an appetite. So you'd say, well, we've got a medium desire for dealing with those, just because they would be less impactful on an organization. So once we decided each of the categories and given them their appetite, or basically like how tolerant we are of them, that is then the point that we started deciding on the risks for each of those. So each category of risk would have maybe 4 or 5 that we've identified. And then we'll look at this on the next slide. It forms part of your risk register. But what we basically want to do is we want to think about each risk. We want to think about, if it happened, how much would it impact us? And also think about how likely it is to happen. And when comparing the impact and the likelihood, you're giving yourself a score kind of based on the table that you have here. And what you want is that score to fall within the range that you've set for yourself within that category. So hard to explain. The register now sample on the next page might help clarify that a wee bit. So this is a sample kind of edited down of our register and a risk that is captured on it. So the risk register is quite a large document. It's usually maybe like a spreadsheet. For me, is the easiest place to capture it. And each risk on that is given a category. It's given the appetite that I mentioned. So do you have a low desire for this risk, or can you tolerate a medium? High is always going to be there as an appetite, but in reality, no one has a high tolerance for any risk. But it just feels like good practice to include it there. And then is the actual risk itself. So, risk might be losing your income, it could be your reputation. So in this case, the risk that we have on our register is that a campaign that we're involved in receives some negative attention in the media. So when we've captured that, we think about, well, what could cause this to happen? And the reason we do that is because thinking about what causes it to happen will allow us to put controls in place to avoid those causes. So here, a potential cause for the negative attention could be we're involved in a politically sensitive campaign. We had elections just recently, so putting out an election manifesto, that there's risk there from that people might not react too well to it. Another one would be that we're not carrying out assessments of the risk for each of those campaigns. And then we look at the controls that are in place for that. So we have a crisis, again, for this specific risk of negative focus. So we have a crisis communications policy in place, which details what we would do if this was to happen. And then each campaign would have kind of very specific focuses within that policy as well. So kind of talking points, I suppose, if it receives negative attention. That one, we decide the likelihood of it happening is quite low. So we gave it a score of 1 because we have risk assessments carried out for every campaign. So we thoroughly think about what could go wrong in advance of everything that we do. The impact on it, though, would be a little bit higher. We think that it could give us a score of 2 out of 3 if we receive negative media attention. Again, for a lot of the organizations here, you don't want to deal with negative media attention. It can be hard to overcome. But those 2 scores together would give us a risk rating of 2, which is very low. And then if I'm going to go back a couple of slides, so we'll see that that puts us within the low risk appetite, which would be appropriate for a reputational risk such as this. Now I know this is just a bit of it's a hard section to really explain, but I just want to give you a flavor of it. What I'll do afterwards, and I'll do this with several other documents, is that I'll share our risk register with everyone so they maybe can kind of see it in more detail, and we can discuss it in the questions afterwards, or if anyone wants to send me an email afterwards just to explain it. It is hard to capture kind of in a couple of minutes. Now that we've captured all that information in our register, how do we report it? So the register is reviewed regularly throughout the year. The staff team will look at it before the Finance, Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting. So we'll review to make sure if there's any actions within it that we're doing them or that we have updates on them. If there's been any changes to controls or potential causes, that it's all reflected in a proposed edit or amendment to the register. This then gets brought to the subcommittee meeting prior to the board meeting, who will discuss it in a lot more depth. They'll give suggestions, or they'll indicate that they're happy with the progress that's been made, and then they will then recommend approving it to the board, at which point the board will review it. So again, that's an example of how the subcommittees are advisory in nature. So they're not approving the updates to the risk register. They are saying to the board, we think this is okay, and we recommend that you approve it. So the board may then, the board will then review, and they may request further updates, or they'll give you the go ahead. The bulk of the work is done at the subcommittee meeting, and the board kind of have confidence that the subcommittee has oversight of the risk process. Okay, now we're going to take a wee bit of just have a look at how we monitor our progress throughout the year. So we monitor our progress based on our strategy, which runs typically about over 5 years. So we have 4 strategic aims, and within those aims, we have more objectives. So each aim would have 5 objectives that are more specific and they're just a real indicator of how we're meeting the aims. They're kind of like a roadmap for us to, these are the things that you need to do to meet aim 1, aim 2, aim 3, etc. And the way we do this every year is through having an operations plan and our organizational metrics. The plans and the metrics are aligned against these strategic aims, and we use them then for reporting. I'll go through that now. So the operations plan is devised annually. What happens is towards the end of the year, each team will meet. They will look at the strategy. They will look at the aims and the objectives of that, and they think about what they're going to do in the coming year to meet those aims and objectives. So what they do with that is they come up here with their intended results, which is a little bit higher level. And then they come up with the actions that they are going to deliver to meet those intended results. So the actions would tend to be more specific things you do rather than the intended results, which are, like I said, a little bit higher level. So an example here maybe would be the second one, that we're growing engagement in our member networks. And the action to do that would have been develop a proposal on invigorating it and putting a plan in place to grow participation. So just an example there of how it all kind of flows towards the aims and the strategic objectives. You'll see there that the results are aligned against the strategic objectives, so that at the end of the year, when it comes time to reporting, we can say, well, we met the strategy by doing this, by doing that, by doing this. And it's just a really, really useful tool for reporting at the end of every year and at the end of the strategy as well. So in terms of how we use that then throughout the year, so it's reviewed quarterly, first of all, by the teams. They will go through the operations plan. They will give a status to each of the actions on the progress for the action. So that could be, we've decided not to do it, it's been abandoned, we haven't begun it yet, all is okay, it's on track, there's been some delays, or it's complete and it's good to go. You'll see here then within the scorecard that we report, it is again aligned against the strategic aims, so that we can again see quite easily we've done 47 out of 66 things to meet aim 1. We've done 27 things to meet aim 2. It's a really useful tool for two ways. One is ensuring that we're always strategically focused, that we're always focused on meeting the goals of the strategy. And two is just as an ongoing reporting tool, so that the board can see the progress that's going on every quarter. Now, the other way that we measure our progress is through our metrics framework. So our metrics are our key performance indicators, or KPIs, which might be a more common term. They were developed a couple of years ago when we were developing the strategy. So they were kind of an indicator to show again how you're meeting the strategy over a long term. So at the end of the strategy, we'll have 5 years worth of data to show how we've grown and met our aims. The metrics are divided into kind of who they affect or where they come from. So say, for example, we have 14 KPIs which are relevant for our members, such as the retention rate or number of new members. Some that are more relevant to the wider sector in terms of, we've had a certain amount of support queries or how many people have gone to our events. Others are more relevant for the public in terms of, measuring the level of trust we have in charities through surveys. Others might be more relevant for internal focuses. So what our financial reserves are or how we're performing against our budget. So we look at that a wee bit more specifically now, but not too in depth, because the 62 I think might be a bit too much to cover in this. So this just gives you an indication of how we report this to the board. So there's a certain amount of the 62 metrics, I think about 20-25, that get reported to the board at each of their meeting. They get put together in a we call it a dashboard. It's just a report like this that gives a flavor of our performance. So it shows, how our reserves have been doing, It shows how we've performed in the media, how many people go to our website, what the satisfaction rates are, things like that. So it's just, again, a handy reporting tool for the board. It's quite visual so that they can see trends, they can see dips in performance without having to focus too much on numbers. Also a useful tool for the staff as well, because it can very easily be shared with the wider staff so they can see our performance easily too, again, without having to dive into a complex spreadsheet of indicators. So next, I want to take a quick look at how we develop policies. This is relatively simple. So a policy usually starts with a need being identified, either by a member of staff, by someone on a subcommittee or on the board, that someone might say, hey, what's our process for dealing with this situation? And then we realize, oh, we need to develop a policy for that. So that gets brought to staff, first of all, who will put together a draft of a policy. This then gets brought to the relevant subcommittee meeting at their or subcommittee review at their meeting, so they can look at it a bit more in depth, make suggestions, and hopefully recommendations to the board. And again, a final draft is brought to the board for them to actually approve. Once it's approved, it then gets added to a review schedule like here, where we just have all our policies in one place. We look at when they were last updated, when they're next going to be updated, which subcommittee is responsible for doing the reviews. And then this last bit is something I wanted to talk about, is who is responsible for approving it. Now, here's where I contradict myself and said that the board have responsibility for approving everything. There are some cases that we decided last year that a subcommittee could be given the authority to approve reviewing an existing policy. So it was a way to kind of take work off the board's agenda and to give more independence and authorities to the subcommittees. So the way it works basically in practice is after a policy has been approved and say it's up for review in 2 years' time, it then gets brought back to a specific subcommittee policy or subcommittee meeting. So say, taking example here, the expenses policy. Oh, excuse me. The staff and employment subcommittee can review this. And if they're happy that the update is not very substantial, that it doesn't change the policy, sorry, the expenses policy was a bad example there because that's with the board. Cybersecurity policy. If the Finance, Audit and Risk subcommittee review it and decide that no major changes are needed, they then have the authority to approve it. It doesn't need to get brought to the board because the board have confidence in the subcommittee's knowledge and experience to update that themselves. Now, the subcommittee will always have the freedom to bring it to the board if they think that it needs further consideration or that it's maybe a major update or a large change. They can always bring it back. But it's been a good way of freeing up time for the board by giving the responsibility to the subcommittee. And the subcommittees themselves are fans of it as well, because it does give them that responsibility, that kind of independence. It's been quite empowering for them. Now, coming up to the last section, we're looking at the governance code. So what the governance code is a set of rules put in place by our regulator here that an organization needs to follow. So there's 6 core principles. Again, these are quite top level kind of aims for an organization to follow. And then within that are the core standards within the principles and some additional standards that a complex organization needs to follow. Complex basically means a slightly larger organization. It wouldn't be a massive organization now to be complex. So the wheel is complex despite not being huge. So I think the majority of the majority of registered charities would need to follow all the core and additional standards. So the core standards are a bit like the actions on our operations plan. They are very specific things that an organization needs to do to follow to meet the core principles, which are the aims. So why is the code important for charity? One is it kind of puts common good governance and processes in place for a charity across all charities, and that just allows the organization to function more effectively. And if it's more effective, it gives it more time to actually devote to meeting its charitable purpose. The common standards help a charity meet the obligations under the Charities Act and Company Law. So basically, it's telling the charity, these are the things you need to do as a charity, as a company, and you have to demonstrate that you can follow them. And then going back to these common standards, it's a method of demonstrating to the public that you are a trustworthy organization, that you are doing all the things that a effective charity needs to do. So we look at the principles a little bit in a small bit more depth, not too much. So the first is advancing charitable purpose. That's basically how you are fulfilling the reason for your existence as a charity, that you're doing what you say you're going to do. So some examples of the standards there are that you have a plan in place, so the operations plan that we looked at, making sure that your charity has the resources in place to actually meet that plan. So that if you're developing an operations plan, that you have the finances in place to do it, that you have the people in places to do it, that you have the knowledge in place to do it. The second is behaving with integrity. And that's basically ensuring that your charity is acting independently, ethically, and avoiding kind of any private benefit. Everything has to be for the public benefit. So some samples there are how you deal with conflicts of interest, or having a code of conduct for the board that's in place and agreed by everyone. Next, then we have leading people. So that's ensuring that the people on your board and in your team, that they're valued and that everyone understands their roles and responsibilities. So again, some samples of that are so that people are clear about their roles and that there's policies in place to guide people in their roles. Next, then we have exercising control. And that's about ensuring that there's appropriate controls in place around for running the organization, things like, you know, your financial controls, your risk management, things like that. So some sample standards there would be managing risk and ensuring that maybe you have adequate insurance cover in place. Then second last, we have working effectively. So that's ensuring that the board is able to work well together and is well resourced. So you're holding regular meetings, that you're giving notice before the meetings, that you're providing agendas and board packs, that you're reviewing the functions of the board and how well it is working and making improvements. And then finally, there's being accountable. So that's just about being transparent and increasing public trust in your organization through that transparency. So that's about dealing with complaints and dealing with them effectively, and then following the requirements that are in place if you've maybe from your funders, from your fundraisers, and your reporting. So how do we do that? And common enough process for most organizations. So we look at each of those core standards and we decide how we meet them. We have then put a log in place where we record how we meet those standards, and then we put together basically a library of evidence to actually demonstrate how we're actually meeting those standards. Once a year, the governance subcommittee will look at this log, they'll look at the evidence, and if all is in order, which it hopefully is, they will recommend to the board that we're compliant, or they might again go back and make suggestions about how we can be better compliant. And then the board will actually review this and do the same process, actually approve our compliance. And the final step is we declare that to the regulator once a year. This is a common enough process for most organizations in Ireland, or most charities in Ireland, I should say. So just to give you an example of how that looks on a log. So we have our core standards, we have our actions that we take for each of those. The core standards are set by the regulator, the actions are decided by us, and then we have the evidence in place to demonstrate that we have those actions. So as an example here, one of the core standards is holding regular meetings, giving notice before the meetings, and providing prepared materials. So the actions we take to do that is we set the dates for meetings a year in advance. So by December, we know when the full year's meetings will be for the following year. We provide agendas for every meeting, and we send out a document packet materials at least 1 week prior to our meeting. And the evidence that we would have in place to document that is we would have, you know, a spreadsheet or Word document with the schedule of those meetings. We'd have a sample agenda from the previous year and a sample board pack from the previous year as well. So it's really important to have, for us to have those things in place, because the regulator might call on you, they might audit you, and they might say, we want to see how you are. You've said you're compliant, we want to see how you are. So if an audit ever happens, we can just give them this log, we can give them the evidence basis and say, there you go, and hopefully nothing else be really required from us. So that's just kind of it for me now, just kind of wrapping it up, because I know I've gone a wee bit over time. We have 3 layers of governance for the wheel. We have our staff. Our staff feed into our subcommittees, who then report onto the board. Again, to reiterate that the board have ultimate responsibility for everything that happens in the wheel. They are basically the legal owners, for want of a better word, of a charity. And the way we manage our governance through the board is through our meetings, our materials, through managing our risk, through reporting on our progress against our strategic goals, through the policies that we have in place and how we review them, and then through meeting the standards of the governance code. So that's about it. I know it's time. I put in a section here for questions, but we're maybe coming to the end of my time slot here. I know we have time set aside after Kathy-Anne's input. So Kathy-Anne, maybe we'll take questions all together after your input, but I think we have a little comfort break now. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. That was great. We do have one question already for you.
Okay.
And if it's okay, we might just do that one now, and then we'll take a quick 5-minute break, if that's okay with everyone. Yeah. So John, the question is from Nevzat, who said, could you please explain how risk appetite affects the formula or approach to risk?
Yeah. Yeah, see that again. That's the really hard bit to explain in a short presentation, and I can share some materials with everyone afterwards to try and explain it a little bit better. But yeah, you've kind of hit the nail on the head that it is a formula. So you give your let me, maybe it might be better to go back to the slide. Excuse me for a moment. This is where all my little pop-ups come back to haunt me. Okay, so you give each risk a rating of the likelihood of how it's going to happen on 1 to 3. You give it a rating on 1 to 3 on how badly you think it's going to affect you. You multiply the 2 of them. So say for this sample risk here, a likelihood of 1, an impact of 2 gives you a risk rating of 2, which is pretty good. Now, going back a step here to our categories, when you decide your category, you give it your appetite of how much you can cope with or deal with having this risk in place. So say for a reputational risk, you might say, well, we've got a really low appetite for that. So we will only tolerate risks that have a score of 1 to 3. So going back to this one then, we've given it the likelihood of 1, we've given it the impact of 2, it's given us a score of 2 overall. Our appetite is 3 or below, so it's within the risk rating. If it fell outside of that, that is the point that you need to start looking at the controls that you have in place. You're going to need to put more controls in place that will either reduce the likelihood or reduce the impact so that you're able to realistically, honestly give it a score that will bring it back to within the appetite for that risk category. I hope that maybe answers the question. But again, we can talk about that a wee bit later towards the end. Yeah, it's my least favorite section of this presentation because it's just, you have to explain it, but it's really hard to explain in a very short space of time. But again, I can share some materials afterwards that might help.
Thanks, John. That's great. And yeah, as John said, we can share all of these presentations afterwards as well. So any relevant documents or whatever that we can share, we will do that. So
yeah,
oh, sorry,
so I'll
John.
sorry, Kathy. So not only the presentation, I can share, say, our risk register, our operations plan, our metrics documents, just to give an idea of what it looks like. It's a little harder online. When we were in person, I could kind of share printouts with everyone to see, but you obviously can't do that in a slideshow. But the Excel files might make it a bit easier.
Thank you. So I'm going to suggest now that we have a very short 5-minute break. So you can get yourself some tea or a coffee and have a stretch. And when we come back, we will then do a little bit on HR management and then have some more questions as well. So I will see you all at 6 minutes past, if that's okay. To show our organization structure. So those of you who were in Dublin with us will have seen how our structure looks. And it has since changed a little bit because we are kind of reforming some of our teams because we have gotten some additional funding and things like that. So our structure looks slightly different. So to have a very quick view of it here and how we kind of each team is made up, you can see that there are, let's say, 4 different broad colors, and they represent 4 different areas of the wheel. So we have the advocacy and research area over on the left. We then have development and growth, which is those in the orange, and you can see I sit there as well myself. Then we have the pink structure, which is our sector skills. And then we have in the green, we have finance and operations, and John sits in that team. And then we are currently hiring a HR manager, which is far over to the right there. So I suppose at a very quick glance, we have a CEO, we then have directors, we then have a layer of senior managers. After that, we have managers, and then after that, we have officers. So that is the structure that we follow, and we have kind of a system in the wheel that ensures that one person is not line managing more than 5 people. So that's just to ensure that people are able to focus on their work while also not having too many employees to line manage. And I suppose the different teams are kind of self-explanatory, but maybe 2 that aren't are the development and growth in orange and the sector skills in pink. Those 2 teams do a lot of our projects and programs in the wheel. And the way that we loosely differentiate them is that the team in orange, so development and growth, do a lot of our EU funded or EU adjacent type programs. And the pink team, sector skills, focus a lot more on our nationally funded projects. So supporting our members with kind of upskilling and training. So that's a quick look at our team. And I know that when we met in June, some organizations were saying that they don't really have structures, and then some were saying they do have very clear structures like this. So this is just kind of how we operate and how we find our organization to function best within these teams. So in terms of working at the wheel, we have what we call a culture statement. So this is the culture that we as employees and an organization try to go by. So we are a flexible, family-friendly team, and we value fairness and flexibility from all of our team members. We proactively ensure a healthy balance in the pace of work, while we thrive and enjoy working in a high-performance environment. We welcome and encourage the ideas and input of all staff, and we engage in respectful debate and problem solving. There is freedom for everyone to contribute equally and have their views or voice respected and valued. We consistently communicate with each other in a respectful manner. We are open, transparent, and honest. We take pride in providing a consistently high-quality service. And we are confident in our ability to adapt to a constantly changing external environment. So I suppose one thing to note on this culture statement, unlike what John was showing earlier, policies and things like that, this culture statement is not a policy. It is just kind of an agreement among staff and the organization that this is how we will try our best to work and to operate our projects, etc. And I suppose regardless of the fact that we have a very structured organization with kind of 5 different layers in it, we still value opinions from everybody. We have feedback mechanisms so that people, regardless of their role, are able to feedback and share ideas on how we can improve our projects and systems and organization ways of working. Another aspect of the wheel in terms of like how we look after employees and how we try to ensure that, you know, we are all enjoying our jobs is that we have a well-being committee. So this is not like the committees that John was sharing about. This is not linked to the board or anything. This is only made up of employees. It is just a completely internal optional committee. So as part of our HR strategy, a voluntary staff wellbeing committee was established in Q1 of 2022. And this committee has a couple of responsibilities. The first is to consider ways to incentivize individuals to demonstrate healthy staff engagement habits. So how we can work with each other, how we like to communicate with each other, etc. And ensuring that, you know, we work our allocated hours and we're not overworking too much, etc. Related to this, we actively support and encourage work-life balance at all levels of the organization. This is obviously extremely important to, you know, staff morale. We then review the Employee Assistance Programme, also called the EAP, which I will touch on in a minute. to ensure that it provides the well-being supports that are required and that all staff are aware of the EAP service and the benefits that it can bring should they wish to use it. And I'll touch on that in a moment. And then the Wellbeing Committee also implements a staff engagement schedule at the start of every year, and that includes some opt-in sessions. So previously we have had some kind of opt-in sessions on time management. So if people want to, learn more about how to better manage their time in order to facilitate an easier working life for them, we do sessions like that. And again, a lot of these sessions would be opt-in. So it's not a mandatory thing, this committee. The committee also considers actions that support lunch and regular breaks when working remotely and in person. So we really do try to recommend everybody takes their standard 1 hour lunch, which is what we have here in the wheel. And we try to say people take that between the hours of 1 to 2 p.m. and to encourage others not to kind of interrupt colleagues during that lunchtime so that they have their own space during the workday. We actively ensure that we are all aware of our way of working and our communication charter and the importance of communications in relation to this. So we have something called a communications charter, which outlines all of the different methods of communication that we use in the wheel. So the different online tools, how we use email, Microsoft Teams, telephone, all of that. And we ensure that all staff are aware of that and that we each know what the best method of communication is depending on the scenario. We then consider budget in relation to the work of the committee. So like I said, those kind of opt-in sessions or those staff engagement sessions, oftentimes that is us hiring an external person to come in and deliver a training, and the committee looks after the budget in relation to this. And the committee then reviews the membership annually to enable current members to step down if they would like to and invite new members to join. Because, as I said, this is an optional committee. Staff do not have to be part of it, but if they wish to join it, they're very welcome to do so. So what I mentioned there a couple of moments ago was the Employee Assistance Programme. And one of the things that the Wellbeing Committee does is ensure that staff know what the Employee Assistance Programme is and how to access it if they need to. So the EAP for short, it is a free, confidential employee support service that is designed to support employees resolve personal or work-related concerns through telephone support, specialist information, and telephone or video counselling. The EAP for our organisation is provided by Inspire Workplace, and they are an independent company and it is available to all of our employees. So important to note here, the EAP is not an in-house service that the Wheel staff provide. It is a separate company that we contract to offer support to staff should they need it. And a good thing to note here is it's a completely confidential service. So if an employee does access the service, it is not going to be, the Wheel won't be informed that Kathy-Ann Fox accessed the service on this date. It is completely confidential, which hopefully encourages staff to access it more. And it is also free as well, which is a huge bonus to encourage people to actively use it if they need it. Some of the things that the EAP can advise on is financial concerns, health problems, stress, family issues, relationship issues, legal issues, addiction, depression or anxiety, life events, and consumer issues. So it is the job of the Wellbeing Committee and indeed our HR manager to inform staff that this service exists and should they need to use it, how they can access it. And you can access it through a 24/7 free phone helpline. So it is always available to you. It is not just available during work hours. And as I mentioned, it's completely confidential and it's voluntary. There are lots of staff that will never ever access this program, but for those that do need it, it is there and it is a benefit for our staff. So my next point is in regards to our performance management process. So I know that when some of you were in Dublin with us, we chatted through this a lot and we kind of discovered some organizations in Turkey have a variation of this. Some kind of have a very informal version of it, and some organizations don't really have anything similar to this, simply because the workload is too great and there just isn't enough time for it. But in the Wheel, we have a very clear performance management process, and it is largely made up of two different elements. So we firstly have a probation review, and that occurs 6 months after a new employee has started working with the Wheel. So every employee of the Wheel is subjected to a probation review, and it usually takes place 6 months after they have started work. And following that, if an employee passes their probation review, every year after that you were employed with the Wheel, you will have a yearly appraisal. So what does that mean? So the probation review form, as I said, all staff undergo a probation period. It usually is 6 months, but this depends on the contract. The performance gets reviewed after 6 months by the line manager of the employee, and the staff member and line manager review their performance together over the last 6 months, and they make plans for future goals. And sometimes, if necessary, probation can be extended. So in the Wheel, we have a very clear system. We have guidelines on how to do the probation review. We have templates that the line manager and the employee fill in, and we have a very structured guidance on how to do this whole process. And again, we can share those documents in case it is useful with you after this as well. So the probation review, as I said, the purpose of it is to provide an opportunity for meaningful dialogue between the employee and their line manager to identify accomplishments during the probationary period, and then to provide any supports needed to improve the employee's performance. So it's a great opportunity for a new staff member to let their line manager know what they have done in the first 6 months, and maybe any trainings or support that they need in order to help them succeed with their job. The line manager will discuss any areas that maybe need improvement. They will also provide some guidance and define the necessary skills for effective performance in the current position, and then identify skills which should be enhanced to encourage contribution, engagement, and participation in fulfilling the role. So the probation process, sometimes the word probation can be kind of scary to people, but it is not meant to be kind of a thing that people worry about. It really is a two-way communication with the line manager and the employee to discuss how the first 6 months have gone and what their plans are moving forward in order to be able to continue to work well in their role. So after somebody has passed their probation, so the 6 month time period has passed and they have passed their probation, and that is great. They are now, you know, a full-fledged employee of the Wheel, having passed probation. What happens after that is every year there is an performance appraisal process. That also involves, similarly to the probation, there is a whole kind of document on guidance on how to do this process. There are templates, again, that both parties fill in order to be able to do this process properly. The purpose of the appraisal is to review and assess staff performance and progress over the period of 1 year. And the success of the appraisal system depends on the commitment and willingness by staff to engage in the process. So, as I said, similarly to the probation, you need to ensure that both the line manager and the employee are actively involved in this process for it to be successful. The appraisal is the process of ensuring that staff know what is expected from them in their work and measuring how their performance meets these expectations. It is an opportunity for staff and their manager to engage in an open, two-way discussion about achievements, progress, career expectations, training and development opportunities, and future goals and objectives for the following year. So, I suppose to simplify it down, it is a great opportunity for the employee to share with their line manager the things they think went really well during the year, particular things they want to highlight as a big achievement of their year. And then it's a great chance for the employee to say, you know, next year I want to achieve this goal, and in order to achieve this goal, I need this training to help me achieve this goal. So it's a great opportunity to identify training and support as well. As I said, once the probation period is passed, the staff member's performance will be reviewed formally every year through the appraisal. The staff member reviews their own work over the year and they comment on their own process. So they do this solo, they do their own review in their own time. And the line manager at the same time is doing their own review of the employee's performance as well, independently. And what happens then is both documents come together and the employee and the line manager have a meeting where they discuss the overall performance, they have a look at both of the documents, and then they set some goals for the future. So again, this isn't a scary process, or it shouldn't be a scary process. It happens with all employees in the wheel, and it just ensures that all staff members feel that their career is, you know, being progressed through working with the wheel. They're able to access trainings and supports that they need. And it's also a great opportunity for a staff member to kind of highlight their achievements from the year, so that the line manager can be reminded of those as well. So that is kind of a snapshot on the appraisal and the probation. And as I said, I can share more info on that if needed. And the very last thing that I just wanted to share was our HR system in the wheel. So we use a website or a system called HR Locker. And this is actually an Irish company. So I know in June when we chatted about this that some organizations didn't use anything like this and some had their own kind of internal systems. But what we use HR Locker for is to track staff members' annual leave entitlements, the annual leave calendar for all staff, so we can log into the system and I can see very quickly that John is going to be on leave next week, and then that means somebody has to cover his work next week. So it's a great planning tool as well. We also use it to track sick leave. So when a staff member has been on sick leave, they register this in the system and it just keeps a record of all of that for the end of the year. We can also log our training on it. So when a staff member has completed training, if that is internal training or external training, and they receive a certificate, the staff member can upload that training record onto the system and upload their certificate as well. So it's just a great kind of record keeping service, I suppose. And we also manage our timesheets on that system. So every week we are advised to log our timesheets so that our line managers can just keep an eye on the hours that we're working to make sure that we're not, you know, working too many hours. And if we are working too many hours, that is a great way for the line manager to spot it and then be able to ask the employee why they felt the need, you know, was there something, an event going on or something that meant that they were working some additional hours. So HR Locker, it's a cloud-based online people management or HR platform that is designed with, but not exclusively for, progressive tech, professional services, construction, and not-for-profit companies in mind. So this system is not just for the wheel. Lots and lots of organizations use it, but you can kind of customize it to a certain degree to make it work for us in the wheel. And that brings me to the end of my quick presentation, hopefully, on our kind of HR management systems in the wheel. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and ask, are there any questions on anything John shared, I shared, any questions about the wheel in particular? Tuche?
Hi, Catherine, again. First of all, thank you both of you for these very insightful presentations. I have a question to you. I couldn't remember. I remember your culture statement. You just showed the culture statement. I'm trying to remember. Was that a part of your governance document? I'm curious about how is it prepared at the first hand? Like, who prepared it, and are you with the involvement of the staff reviewing and revising maybe it regularly? How the people are adapted to the statement? This is what I'm curious about. Thank you.
Yeah, so it is not, the culture statement is not a policy, so it doesn't fall under our governance or anything like that. It was not created by our board or in association with our board. So it's just kind of like an employee tool, I suppose, that we as employees put together. And it was actually created before I started work in the wheel. I think, John, correct me if I'm wrong. But we had an external consultant come in to kind of like an in-person staff workshop, and all staff worked together to create what they felt should appear on the culture statement. John, am I right in that?
Before my time as well, but that would be, I would imagine that would be it, because that tends to be how we do things. It's probably going back about 10 years, but we do look at it as a staff team regularly as well. I think we reviewed it as a group 2023, I think.
Yeah.
That sound about right, where the whole team looked at each of the points on the statement and said, is this language still right for the wheel as it is now? Is it right for 2023 or 2024 or whatever it might be? So we just gave everyone a chance to change some language, because some of the language was a little bit out of date as well. And then I think there's plans to come back to it at some point as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like as John was saying, it was created definitely over 10 years ago when everybody was still in an office environment as well. So our way of working was completely different when it was created to when we reviewed it about 2 years ago. So I remember when we were reviewing it, there was a lot of things that related to, in-office working. And we're very much a hybrid organization now. So a lot of that office stuff wasn't that relevant. So we were taking that out of the statement and kind of revising it to make it suit our way of working now. So it is a document that is kind of consistently changing over time. And it is not something that, we created 10 years ago and we never look at it again. But it is, yeah, it's not a formal policy, but it is kind of like an agreement among the staff that this is how we're going to try and work as an organization and respect each other and our way of communication, etc. Does that answer your question?
Yes, indeed. But on the small addition, then is that part of the routine performance review? Because you need to also make sure that people comply with this statement. It is written, but you want that people comply. And if there's an infringement, maybe, I don't know. How is the mechanism to follow up and monitor this culture statement?
Yeah, so in terms of our appraisal process and performance management, the culture statement is not used in that process. What we have, which is slightly similar to the culture statement, we have behavioral competency framework, and I can share that document as well. It basically identifies a number of behaviors that staff are expected to follow in order to do their job well. And some of those behaviors are collaborative working, open communications, leadership, things like that. So in the appraisal and performance management, people are measured against the behavioral competency framework, not the culture statement. However, a lot of the behavioral competencies match quite well with the culture statement. So like a lot of things in the culture statement relate to positive working, collaborative working, open communications, etc. So while a staff member isn't, graded against the culture statement, it is looked at from the behavioral competency framework, and that kind of is very similar.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Another question, I think.
Hey, thanks for sharing all details. After the colleagues came from Dublin, they were like, oh, Will has this intermediary systems and blah, blah. We should hear them and either apply in SDGM or try to structure these with the organizations that we work on. And this is coming from a experience. Let's say the people committed to the culture until the probation process, and the next month their probation finish, the stuff starts to happen. Are there any cases like that? What's and how you deal with this, if there's any cases, or if it's foreseen beforehand in the papers? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's not something, thankfully, that I have come across. Usually I don't think is an issue, but in that case, I think that would probably then go directly to like a HR manager, and they would try come up with a plan. Maybe that might be what we call a performance improvement plan. So that sometimes is when, maybe a staff member is a great worker and they're consistently doing all of their work. But then, as you say, something changes and their way of working kind of slips, or they're not doing the things that they were expected to do. They can then be put on a performance improvement plan. So this is a short-term plan whereby the line manager and the colleague kind of outline some immediate goals that this person needs to follow to improve their performance. And in a couple of months, that performance is again reviewed. And if their performance maybe hasn't improved, then that moves into another step, again with a HR manager that would be looked at from there. But I thankfully haven't come across it, so I don't know. But that performance improvement plan is that's why that's there, is to kind of figure out, the next steps and to try improve somebody's performance.
But then again, you count the cultural, I couldn't find the right word, but obedience, let's say right now, just for the sake of the translation, under the performance review, right? Like, as it is a task to do, kind of a.
Yeah, exactly. So again, like the performance improvement plan would have links to the behavioral competency framework to make sure that they are collaboratively working, open communications, and it would be reviewed against that as well. Tezcan, I think your hand was next.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your both for your inspiring presentations. As Çağlar said, after our guys got back from Dublin, they seems that they're very impressed by your structure, your work, and now I understand very well why they were very impressed. They were very impressed. So it was inspiring. Just to compare, we have very similar mission statements and the activity sets, almost very, very similar. But we have very different structure in terms of governance mechanisms. So we discuss time to time among us how to improve our governance structure, and we have very traditional functional way to optimize all our energy to produce most efficient way of producing outputs. But we understand that you have very well structured governance structure on three well-known levels. The board, the subcommittees, the staff, CEO, directors, etc. But as far as I understand, that needs very well-defined delegation system between these levels. And it's very frequent as well. We discussed very frequently among ourselves. Well-defined delegation system is very crucial, but it's very difficult to establish this kind of very well-established delegation system. So I would like to ask, is there any problem with this, your delegation system, and how do you manage it? Just to illustrate, the board meets every 2 months, as far as I follow. And that means they meet 6 times in a year. So it's not a very frequent period. So, and at the same time, I understand that the number of board members is even number, 12. Generally, it's an odd number, just to manage in terms of any kind of conflict in the board. So what's the principle in the board for decision-making processes? This is majority vote or unanimity principle is applied?
Two good questions. On the delegation, that would have been a good idea for me to include a slide on that. Actually, we have a list of delegated responsibilities that are part of our board handbook, which the board kind of are responsible for approving as well. And what it mostly is kind of operational matters. So the day-to-day operations are delegated downwards to the CEO, who then obviously may further delegate to other members of the senior management team. But there's a well-defined list of delegated matters that were developed some time ago that the board will look at roughly maybe every 2 years to make sure that they're still fit for purpose, I suppose, that it's still right that the CEO can do it, or if they want to give more to the CEO. We're very fortunate that we have a very collaborative board. And I guess that brings us into the next point of the odd numbers, which is a good point and not something I thought about. Our decisions are generally made kind of by consensus and through discussions. So in all the times that all the board meetings that I've attended, it's never really been put to a vote. It's kind of been put to conversation and try to get people to agree as a group, rather than 6 people say yes, 5 people say no. We are fortunate that conflict hasn't arisen, but it always could, I suppose. We do kind of have within the board handbook a code of conduct that the board kind of follow, that they're obliged to follow, and I guess it's kind of covered within that it's is done on that kind of consensus, kind of almost informal way to make decisions rather than formalized voting. If we needed to, I suppose we could, but it thankfully hasn't come up.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, John. And I think from my perspective as well, as somebody that isn't really involved in the board, it definitely helps the wheel and the staff that John is our governance and compliance manager, having like a dedicated role that is very collaborative with the wheel and with the CEO, etc. Definitely, I think helps matters rather than, you know, somebody having a different role, but then the additional board bit just being added on to their role. I think it definitely helps that John has, you know, time to give to that as well. Nevzat, you have a question?
Thank you all for this very informative meeting. It's very nice to see you and hear from your experience and system. I have two sets of questions actually. Katie-Ann, you mentioned about an external support system for the person, for the staff members. How do you deal with the conflicts? I mean, does this mechanism provide conflict management service, or do you deal it within the well-being committee? This is the one set question. And the second one is related to general monitoring and evaluation system. How do you monitor the progress? I mean, do you use timesheets, staff reports, project reports, or do you use a project management or organization management system? I mean, is it used live, provide up-to-date information, or I mean, is it, does this do you report for in time intervals, for example, 3 months or something like that? Okay, thank you very much again.
Yeah, of course. So I think if I understood your first question in regards to the EAP, is that in terms of if we have internal staff conflict? Yeah.
I mean, conflict with the within staff, with the board, or with other, I mean, stakeholders.
Yeah. So that wouldn't go through the EAP. That would, I suppose, firstly try to be dealt with internally in the wheel. So we have, I think, a complaints kind of mechanism in place within the wheel in terms of if you have an issue with somebody, depending on your role, you go to this person. If the issue can't be resolved at this level, then you take it a level higher, etc. And depending on the severity of the issue, you maybe reach the CEO level or the board. And ultimately, if the issue couldn't be resolved through that, I think the next step would be to try mediation between the two sides. However, thankfully, we don't ever really tend to come up across those internal issues of massive conflict. Most times, if there is any kind of cross-team conflict or anything like that, it is usually able to be dealt with kind of in a meeting among the line managers or a senior manager where they can discuss the issue, try come up with a solution, and then work through it that way. So that would be how we would tend to resolve our internal conflicts, which thankfully don't really occur. But the EAP wouldn't come into that. The EAP is a lot more for like your personal issues that you might have as a person or as an employee, because it doesn't have to just relate to it work matters. You can access the EAP for your personal matters as well. And then on your other question, I think, yeah, so you were talking about like project monitoring reports, all of that stuff. So we don't use HR Locker for that purpose. We don't do any reporting on HR Locker except for timesheets. HR Locker does have an option to record your time spent on each individual project that you work on, but we don't utilize that. We just use the overall hours of 9 to 5:30, Monday to Friday kind of thing. how we do report on our projects sometimes depends on the individual project and what kind of reporting and monitoring that the funder wants itself. So I suppose my projects are all very EU focused. So we would have kind of a standard mechanism of we would have to report to the funder once every year, and that would be in a very long formalized report, etc. And to enable us to do that report well, what we tend to do in my team anyways is we do quarterly reports. So every 3 months, and I know John does some work on this as well, every 3 months each team will feed into their director what their team has done for the previous 3 months. So we will look at the achievements of those 3 months, the focus of the next 3 months, any issues that we came across in that reporting period, how we tried to solve those issues, what happened from them. And those quarterly reports are then not only used for John and the board if they want an update, but they can also then be used to help us report to the funders. So we try to ensure that, you know, we're doing our reports every 3 months so that it doesn't come to the end of a year and we have no reporting done, and then we're trying to remember in December what we did in February. So yeah, we have kind of templates that we use. So these are Word documents. Each team would get a very similar Word document. We fill it in by a certain deadline, and then we save them all on our system and then can access them when we need. But yeah, some funders require very, very detailed reports. And if that's the case, we try to gather that detail and have a look at the report even before we start the project so that we know what we're going to need when it does come to reporting time. Does that answer your question? Good stuff.
Thanks a lot.
No problem. Any other questions or comments? Anything? I'm sure we gave you all a lot of information and it's a lot to digest. So I hope it made sense, but I think when we can share the slides, and John as well will have some other kind of governance related documents that he can share, I think it will hopefully make more sense when you can actually see the documents that we're talking about as well. And as always, if any questions arise out of you looking at those documents, you can pass them to Celine or Tuche, I presume, and they can let us know, and we can get back to you all.
So, thank you again.
Please fill in the evaluation form. I can see.
Yeah. Celine, Jim, do you have anything before closing? Anything to remind or note, or I don't know, any announcements at all?
Just thank you, Ketian and John, for your time and your great presentations. And for our participants, please fill in the evaluation form. It takes only just few seconds, you know. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you again. And maybe we can contact you further, Ketian and John, with some further questions, because we are also working on several issues in SDGM. So see you in the coming period, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much. It was lovely to see you all. And yeah, hopefully see you all soon. It was nice to see some familiar faces as well. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
Toplantıyı kapatmayın da.
Bye.
Please don't close the meeting.